people explain that?
Yes, go ahead, Jerry.
No, I was gonna say for the new people, maybe explain what we just did.
Oh, yeah, so we said a blessing. So a studying Torah, discussing holy matters, actually, is a mitzvah, which is to say a commandment. And before observing many mitzvot, not all, that's a whole other interesting discussion, we say a blessing to recognize that the purpose of our study, or lighting Shabbat candles, or putting on a talit, is not just an ordinary thing because we like candles at dinner, but it's an observance of a mitzvah. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I am going to share screen, and I'm going to give you the 2 or 3 slide summary. I presume you can see this. And current slide. Whoops. Okay, so are we seeing, did Moses have horns? Yes? Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah, so I give a talk, which I really love to give, called The Joys of Biblical Hebrew. And it's basically, I actually don't even remember if I have it on my website, but it's looking at interesting oddities of Hebrew. And one of the oddities that we look at is the fact that since the Hebrew Bible and the Torah certainly was written without vowels, in most cases you can tell what the word is, but not in all cases. So, and this leads to this issue. So this is the very quick summary, and then we're going to look into an article, which I found very interesting. So in the book of Exodus, when Moses comes down from Sinai, we read, Karan or panav bedivro ito, which means his face was radiant with speaking to him, meaning God. But the Torah has no vowels, so this word could be karan, which means to shine. It's actually a verb. Or it could be keren, which means to be horned, okay? And Jerome, so the Jewish translation is often, you'll find lots of different translations, his face was radiant. And I often talk a lot about the Septuagint, which is the first translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And that also seems to imply that his face was glorified. But then we have in the 4th century of the Common Era, a translation by Jerome, which was called the Vulgate. And it's called the Vulgate because it was translated into Latin, which is a common language, and that's at the root meaning of, what vulgar means. And so he translates it. I'm not going to try and read the Latin, but it says his face was horned from the conversation he had with the Lord. Okay. And whoops. Oh, I want to go back up. Okay. So yeah, over here. So, and we'll see in this article also that Moses in art is often depicted with horns. So this is from Michelangelo, statue of Moses. And this is usually the one that we see when people discuss this. But I also came across the fact that in the House of Representatives, along the House of Representatives are bas relief images of great lawmakers. And Moses is one of them, not surprisingly, and he has slight horns there. And of course, this is the thing that we just discussed. So, and I'm curious, how many of you have ever had someone seriously ask to see or feel your horns? I mean, not
my horns or Moses's horns?
No, your own horns.
Oh no, just I've had a couple times where the people, a non-Jewish person, has this context in a pejorative way that mentions that Moses had horns.
Yeah, no, I actually have. Well, in the Midwest, at a program which there were very few Jews, met people that had never met a Jew, and the understanding was that this person mentioned was that that Jews had horns, and they really wanted to see mine. I mean, and they weren't saying it to be mean or nasty. So it was
the same guy, because the same guy who said it to me in college also was from the Midwest. So it must be the same guy.
Yeah, could be. Okay.
How low do you get from a passage saying Moses specifically developed horns, implying that Jews normally didn't have them, to believing that all Jews have them. I don't.
Yeah, so the article is going to discuss that. And let me ask you a quick question. Do you now see?
I have
sorry, go ahead.
I have two examples of people thinking Jews had horns. One was when I was about 12 years old. I had a teacher in religious school who'd just gotten out of the army, and he had someone who had never met a Jew before and really thought he was supposed to have horns.
Mm-hmm.
And then when my husband was in the Navy, he also ran into people who'd never met Jews before and didn't know why my husband didn't have horns.
Right.
You need horns to blow on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
So actually, there is an element of connection in that. So let's
Really?
remember that. So I presume now you can see the Torah.com article. Yes. Okay. Good. So Moses' shining or horn face, and I'll read the introduction. What happens to Moses' face after his encounter with God on the mountain? Does he radiate light or grow horns? Ancient Near Eastern iconography can help us understand what this verse is trying to communicate. And there's, of course, the famous statue of Moses. Okay. Go ahead. Yes.
Yes, I when I was in Rome, and we had a tour guide who took us naturally to see the statue, and he said that when Michelangelo made that statue, he made it purposely that Moses looks very angry.
Oh. I don't know if I would say Moses looks angry, but
look at the lips. Look at the lips and the eyes.
So okay, but well, okay. I'm not going to dispute what he said, but it does. That's not what I would think of if I saw that. But because Moses gets angry a lot of times in the Bible, this moment is not one of them. Okay, so I'm going to read again a little more of the opening. After receiving the second set of stone tablets containing Adonai's commandments, Moses comes down from Sinai with a face that is changed. Moses did not know that the skin of his face was karand. So here the translator is going to discuss the meaning of karan, but he's making it a verb because he had been talking with him, mainly Adonai. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses' face, the skin of his face was karand, and they were afraid to come near him. So it's something they were afraid of. And we're going to see later in the article, Moses covers his face with a veil when he speaks with the people, and he uncovers his face when he speaks with God. So let's so would someone like to read Moses' face in the ancient versions? And I will jump in with Hebrew.
Translations consistently render the word put on as shown or was radiant. The translation stands in a long and venerable line of tradition, which renders the Hebrew
Karan or panav.
The skin of his face karand, as the appearance of the skin of his face was changed with glory.
Was charged with glory. Let me read, Jerry, because it's kind of small. And also I want to comment as I read. So you have the LXX, which means 70. It refers to this myth that 70 individual scholars were charged with translating the Hebrew into Greek, and they all came up with identical translations, which I don't believe for a second. But then the conclusion is that you don't have to go back to the Hebrew, that the Greek was divinely inspired. Stephen, were you going to say?
It's even weird, but it's not they all translated perfectly, so they got the same result. They all came up with the same mistranslation.
They all came up with the same Greek.
Introduced the same errors in order to, which means they presumably went to the same, learned from the same teachers, indirectly or indirectly, what things you should translate.
So I have a much simpler.
Literally.
I have a much simpler explanation. I don't believe it.
Okay.
So there's two reasonable explanations. One, it was divinely inspired by God. Or number two, we don't believe it. I'm not sure who's talking there.
But I'm saying number three is they didn't really translate it. They just regurgitated them. They didn't
No,
really.
but it's the
they
entire Bible.
They did
It's
from memory the translation they've been taught.
Okay, I don't accept that. Because it's just there's just too much there. And
Okay.
also, I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a lot of mistranslation. What I would say, and if you've been with me in these classes, that the Hebrew is open to a lot of various translations. I would always point to what we're discussing today as a mistranslation.
Right.
And as we dig into this text, we're going to see it's more complicated than that.
I think the first difference between it, what they came up with, and what's in the original is whether God said, "Let us create" or "Let me create." I mean, like at the beginning of Genesis.
I don't recall what the Septuagint says about that. So let's go on, otherwise we'll never get there. So a translation into Syriac says the skin of his face shone. Then there are a number of very old translations which are called Targum. Targum simply is, I'm not sure if it's Hebrew or Aramaic or both. It means translation, but the Targums typically are different translations into Aramaic, which was recorded. So we have Onkelos, which is probably the most famous one, which says the radiance of the glory of his face increased. Another Targum, the splendor of the features of his face shone. Another Targum, the splendor of his face became greater. Another Targum, the splendor of the glory of Moses' face shone. And another Targum from the Samaritans, the radiance of his face became greater. So these Targums appear to translate the word skin, or, which is different than the word for light, which is also or, but light is spelled with a aleph. I will, make sure that, where is she? Keeps me honest. Debbie keeps me honest in my Hebrew.
Yes. Well, Karen also comes from a ray of light.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. So then the question, which we'll see, is Karen is a ray of light or shining, and the question is that connected to the word for horn, Karan? And that's what this article is about. That Moses' face was glowing or shining is also the standard understanding of the text in most medieval Jewish commentaries. While this seems at first glance like a sensible translation, it seems to ignore the meaning of the verb karan. So, somebody want to read Moses grew horns, if you have a clear. Jerry Kirschman, would you like to read?
Sure.
Thank
How
you.
did you know I was looking at the screen? Okay. So Karen, or Karan, as it says, is apparently a denominative verb derived from the noun Karen, horn. The verb occurs only 4 times in the Bible, but the noun is used dozens of times in the biblical text. The verb does not come from the noun, then Karen
Slow down. If the verb does come from the noun.
Oh yeah, the verb does. Sorry, yeah, I'm on my smaller screen today.
Sorry.
The verb does come from the noun. It does come from the noun. Then Quran suggests that Moses' face was horned in some fashion. In fact, the only other time that this verb occurs in the Hebrew Bible, it means to actually have horns.
Okay, so this is from the Psalms.
All right, I'll just read the English, I suppose.
Please, yeah.
Yeah. So Psalm 69:31, I will praise the name of God with a song. I will magnify him with thanksgiving. This will please Adonai more than an ox or a bull with horns and hooves.
Here's another image of a horned Moses. This one I had never seen before. That's pretty clearly horned. Okay. So continuing.
Thus, Akilah, a 2nd century CE Jewish Greek translation of the Bible, rendered the phrase, his face skin became horned. Similarly, Jerome's 4th century CE Latin Vulgate translation renders it as cornuta esset facies, sua. His face was horned. Jerome is famous for his interest in Hebrew truth, Hebraica veritas, returning to the Hebrew original and hewing as close to it as possible, which may explain his more wooden rendering here. Under the influence of the Vulgate's translation, the image of the horned Moses became quite common in medieval art, as we just saw in Figure 2.
Yeah, we just saw Figure 2.
Yeah. According to Ruth Mellenkoff, such depictions of Moses are first attested in 11th century England. But the image is most familiar in Michelangelo's famous 16th century sculpture of Moses in the Church of San Pietro in Vincoli in Rome, which places small horns atop Moses' head from Figure 1 in the main image. The above suggests that understanding Quran as to shine may be at best a paraphrase, and at worst an obfuscation. Rather than to shine, to be horned, or to have horns seems a reasonable and justifiable translation for Quran.
And so now what we're going to do is look at what is puzzling to me is why the text would talk about Moses having horns, if that is a possible meaning.
Polemical response. Not all would agree. Rabbi Samuel Ben Meyer, Rashbam, that's Rashbam. Okay, right. Responds polemically to the Vulgate translation of Exodus 34:29, which denominated medieval Christianity. Which dominated medieval Christianity. The word Karen is related to the idea of looks like
Hod.
Yeah, Hod. Yeah, I gotta figure out how to make
Grandeur, like Hoduath Adonai Ki Tov.
Yeah,
And
I suppose you could zoom it in there a little bit at the top. Could you click? I
can zoom a little bit, but I'm gonna lose.
No,
Whoop,
no, not two. No, you got to go like 250. 200. Yeah, you got to.
Okay, let's see. And I can slide over.
There you go.
Okay, that's about as good.
Oh
as
yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Good. Yeah. It's good. Okay. Hod, right? Grandeur, right? It is like the word. Let's see, Karanim, right?
I guess.
In the phrase from Habakkuk 3:4, which gives off rays, Karanim, on every side. Anyone who connects Karan in this verse to the meaning of horn, as in the phrase in Deuteronomy 33:17, he has horns like the horns of the wild ox. Karen Raem, right? Or it's actually three words, so it's
I would say
Karanim.
it's Karani Ra'im Karanah.
Yeah. Karen, right, that's right. So he has horns like the wild ox is a fool, right? For many words in the Torah have at least two separate distinct categories of meaning. Yeah, that makes everything really difficult.
Yeah, so far they're saying that word is quite often used to mean horned. It certainly doesn't always mean shining.
So it can be. It's interesting. So back to Rashbam. So Rashbam supports a traditional Jewish reading with the verse from Habakkuk based on the parallelism in the verse between brightness, daylight, and horns. And I'll just read the English Habakkuk 3:4. The brightness was like daylight. Rays came forth from his hand.
Yeah, and over here we see the same word.
Yeah, Karanim.
Karanim.
Karanaim here with the vowels.
And Karnaim.
Yeah.
Karanaim, right.
Yeah, that would be two, right? Debbie?
Yes, well, more than one. Yeah.
More than one or two?
It can be many.
There's like
many,
Yad, Yadim, and Yadayim. So
yeah.
So it's two, right?
Not necessarily two. It can be more than two.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand. I was looking at the Hebrew and didn't understand what was going on there, but okay. So anyway, that's not important. We seem caught between two very different understandings. Was Moses' face shining or was it sprouting horns? Non-textual evidence from ancient Near Eastern iconography may cast light on this question. Oh, good. Okay. Moses' face.
So our group has got no doubt split into two groups.
Yeah.
Some of us are really interested and excited about this. Some of us could care less. For those of you who could care less, I apologize.
Well, what's interesting is it may really mean horns.
Yes,
right?
Yes. So I'm going to call on Jim, and you are muted, so please unmute.
Yeah, sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
Just above in Habakkuk 3:4.
Yeah.
And the brightness was like daylight. The rays came forth from his hand. That isn't that supposed to reflect that his face was shining and didn't have horns? Is that what that is meaning? Is that what it's?
Well, I don't know. I don't know who Habakkuk is talking about here. I have to confess, I didn't research that.
Okay,
but the question is
hands, though. That's not his face. I mean,
no, I don't think they're talking about Moses. I mean, I'd have to take a look at Habakkuk here.
I wonder why they said it. Okay.
Yeah, Habakkuk is just a book in the Hebrew Bible. It's not a commentary or or
Okay.
so
Prophet.
yeah, okay. Okay, Near Eastern iconography.
All right. Ancient Near Eastern divinities were often portrayed with horns. Ah, there you go. Sometimes the horns were part of the deity's bodies, figure 3. Other
Hold on a
times they
second, I'm just
appear-
going to show you
Yeah, let's see
figures
it.
one.
Yeah.
So this is figure 3, the goddess Hathor with the sun disk between her cowl
Egyptian.
horns. So there she is, and there's horns between the sun disk.
Well, okay, but the reason behind that is because Egyptian mythology, the bull led either at first the bull would carry the sun, or the bull, there was a chariot with the sun behind the bull, but it was always
Okay.
the bull that carried
Yep.
the
Yeah,
sun
but-
around the earth.
But in
Right.
ancient Near Eastern cultures,
Yeah.
at that time, horns had a positive connotation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
being
and so what
venerated.
and what we're going to
They
see
were
are lots.
venerated. It's not until the Middle Ages when you develop the idea of the devil that horns then become something satanic. And it
No,
takes
that's
a
much
shift.
later, yeah.
Right.
It takes a shift from a positive connotation where there's something, venerated about horns
Right.
to
Right.
something
But-
despised.
So, and to just give you a mild spoiler alert, what the text is going to go through in lots of detail is these characters with horns in the iconography are gods. And
Yeah.
so then the question is Moses being depicted as a god here, or god-like in some sense? And then the other issue, which greatly affects the imagery that we have of horns, is in the Gospel of John. Jesus talking to the Jews, who says, you are basically like your father Satan. So there is that Christian thought goes along these lines. And Jim, I can see you scrunching your head, and I'd be happy to give you the quote on that. Okay, so anyway, we talked about the deity's bodies, figure 3. Other times they appear as stacks of horns worn on a headdress, figures 4 and 5. So there's I'm guessing, I had a little trouble making this out. Let's see what it says. The goddess Ishtar with a
Might need to
horn.
zoom out one click.
Yes, sir. The goddess
No, you're okay.
Ishtar.
Oh,
with
no,
a
it's
horned
just cut
headdress.
off.
And on this one, I'm going to zoom back in, and then on this one, it's the sun god with a horn, and actually that's cut off in whatever copy.
Well, so that's
So I don't know
Babylonian.
if they're
It's-
talking about here,
it's
or
Assyrian.
here, or even there.
It's
So,
Assyrian, by the way.
okay. So back to the text. Horns, stacks of horns, a part of the deity's body, or stacks of horns worn on or as a headdress. Okay, I think we're right here in some cases, Jeff.
Sure, yeah. In some cases, various anthropomorphic figures are identifiable as gods in ancient art only by means of the presence of horns. Without horns was artistic code, signifying that the figure was likely merely human. With horns meant the figure was divine. A further calculus is often present. The more horns, the higher the god status in the pantheon.
Okay, go down. And Naram-Sin, a horned human.
Yeah, so that's Akkad, so that's Assyria.
Okay,
Yeah, and so can we see that picture of figure 6?
sure. So I think this is the guy with the horns. If I'm reading it
Yeah.
correctly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Horns on human individuals are quite rare, but when present are significant. An example from Mesopotamia is the victory stela of Naram-Sin. In this image, which dates to 2250 BCE.
So we're talking really old.
Oh, God, yes.
So that's 1,000 years before Moses.
Yeah, Moses, 1,000 years before, there was a Moses. The great king of Agade is portrayed with horns, not unlike the gods. In Naram-Sin's case, his horns are connected to his conical helmet. Naram-Sin himself is thus not a god, not yet at least, since at least one god, if not two, is represented at the very top of the stela by means of astronomical symbols. Even so, Naram-Sin
let's take a
is,
look at it
yeah.
again.
Yeah, and if you look at the battle things that were worn. There was a helmet that they wore with horns.
Even in the US Senate on, on January 6th.
No, that
Vikings.
was really a Hollywood put up, the helmets with the
Vikings.
horns.
But it is,
Vikings.
Yeah,
but
the Vikings did
even,
not really wear horned helmets. I don't know where that imagery got started.
It came to
But-
Hollywood, they did it. There was a guy who actually didn't know the name, the guy just did it.
but the interesting thing is this guy on January 6th and, imagery and so on presents the idea of horns as being a positive strength thing rather than a devil.
Well, as Cheryl pointed out, classically, the bull with the horns was
yes.
male fertility,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And look, the what do you call it, in the temple had horns on the corners of the altar,
Right,
right?
corners of the altars.
Yeah.
And I think there's a myth that grinding horns from a rhinoceros
Rhinoceros.
has
Still happens in
aphrodisiac.
Asia.
Yeah, yeah.
in
Okay,
Asia.
let's
Oh,
go on
wow.
to Egyptian.
That's for a different reason, which has to do with what part of the human body the rhinoceros horn looks like under certain conditions.
yes.
Well, no, it's not. It's the same thing. It's male fertility. That was the point.
Okay.
the same
the,
thing.
the point is it's a positive reference.
Yeah.
Okay, Egyptian
Yeah.
rulers with horns.
Think we can, yeah. Okay. In Egypt, other godlike rulers are occasionally portrayed themselves with horns. The Ataf and Himkim, the
Figure
roaring
7,
one.
so there's the
Oh, there we
silhouette.
go.
Oh,
There you
wow.
go. Crowns had horns as part of the headdress. The latter, notably, may have served to identify the king with the solar deity at sunrise.
So this is Pharaoh wearing a crown with horns.
Yeah, notice the way they always picture them. They're
Yeah.
fairly human
The
looking.
disc. Mhm.
Moreover, the pharaohs of dynasties 18 and 19, which is going back to 1550 to 1186 BCE, are sometimes depicted with ram's horns wrapped around their ears, with the tips of the horns curling down to rest along their cheeks or jawlines, apparently signaling thereby their divine or semi-divine status.
So I guess
Oh yeah, there
that's
you go.
a depiction of a horn. That
That's
was
like Ramesses there on the right with the
Wow.
ram's horn.
Amhetop.
Yep, Ramesses II, yep.
Yep. Okay. So problems with the horned approach.
Problems with it. Okay, so the iconographic evidence lends support to the notion that Exodus 34 may conceive of Moses having horns not simply shining. Additional details in the passage challenge such a conclusion, however. If Exodus 34 imagined Moses having horns, why not place them on his head?
Which
I'm
would
not
be
sure what that
Rosh
notation is, but okay.
rather than skin.
Oh, Rosh, head. Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, it's just an R and an S here.
I don't know why they do some things in Hebrew and some things in
In this case, it's English pretending to be Hebrew,
Yes,
which
exactly.
is where they appear in ancient Near Eastern iconography, and also medieval art. ? Instead, the Hebrew text repeats 3 times that it is Moses' face, not his head, that was karand. Moreover, the text states that it was the skin of his face that was karand.
Oh, so it was shiny.
Such a description strikes one as dissonant with the image of sprouting horns. And yet, the Egyptian iconographic evidence does allow for a connection between horns and the face. The horns of figures 8 and 9 appear precisely on the face, running from the temples to the cheeks or jawline of the pharaoh, touching, as it would seem, the skin of his face. They may even have been considered part of the pharaoh's visage. Perhaps this is what Exodus 34 is envisioning, actual horns that sprout from the head, but nevertheless also touch the skin of the face somehow. Tough skin. So, rejecting both the shiny and horned interpretations, William H.C. Propp, in his Anchor Bible Commentary on Exodus, suggests that the textual emphasis on Moses' skin means that his face became dry or hardened in some fashion. Moses' face became disfigured, and his conversations with God could be an example, he argues, of a symbolic wound incurred during a rite of passage. Though novel and incorrectly attuned to the text's threefold emphasis on skin, Propp's interpretation is not entirely convincing. Instead of Propp's understanding of Moses' potentially grotesque visage, the passage seems to imply something awe-inspiring and otherworldly, something that caused the Israelites fear and or awe. Both the traditional Jewish interpretation of glowing or the godlike interpretation of sprouting horns seems to fit the context better. So we've gone full circle, we've got 180 here.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. That's good.
So
That's
this
good.
is like, you know, from Fiddler, you're right and you're right. How can you both be right? You're right too.
Yeah. So tying the two interpretations together. In his commentary on the Torah, Rashi, which is Rabbi Solomon Yitzhak from 1040, 1105. So Rashi connects both options. Of course he does. The horn and the shining. Okay, I'll just read the English, all right? So the word Quran is related to the term horns since the light was shining and projecting in the form of a horn. Yeah, that's what it says there. Rashi here intuits that a connection between Quran as horned and Quran as shining. This is supported with what we know from an ancient Near Eastern divine imagery, according to which the gods who wore horns on their heads were often associated with supernatural light. The Mesopotamian concept of Melamu refers to a brilliant light that radiated from the gods, particularly from their heads. The Enuma Elish, section 4. Divine weaponry, among other items belonging to the gods, could also radiate Melamu. The gods were able to give Melamu to others, especially monarchs, and they could also take Melamu away. Melamu was often combined with the term Pulhu, the fear or awe that was evoked by powerful entities like deities and rulers. This may stand behind the poetry in Habakkuk 3:4 referenced above, according to which lights and horns, horns of light, are associated with Adonai, though that passage remains difficult. Can I just make a comment? I
Sure,
raised the
of
hand
course.
and all that if I wasn't reading, but okay. So this interesting point that this Moamu could be given, right? So a god could give this energy or whatever to a mortal and make the mortal something more than mortal,
Right.
right? I
That's what
think
I'm getting
the-
out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's starting to be implied here, that Moses is being pictured. They're questioning whether Moses is being pictured as something more than mortal now, which is
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. And that's where they're going.
Yeah. Okay. This is where we were?
This is
Did
where
you
we were.
skip the
Why would
part?
Moses be Quran?
Did we skip the part right above it or no? No, sorry.
No, I think we read that. Yes,
Oh, yeah.
we read it.
Okay, yeah, Malamo. Yeah, okay, great. So why would Moses be Quran? Whether shining or horned, or in a synthesizing interpretation, horned with light or shining because horned, the fact that Moses' face was Quran underscores his close encounter with the deity, an interaction so close that God's divine qualities are, as it were, quite literally rubbing off on Moses and becoming physically manifested in him. As Exodus makes clear, Moses' face looked this way because he had been talking with him, Adonai, in 34:29. Moses had been exposed to Adonai in extremely close quarters and for extended periods of time, see 34:28. And so now taking on godly characteristics himself, no wonder the people are said to be afraid of him, 34:30. The change to Moses' face may be just what was thought to happen in prolonged divine human encounters, or perhaps readers are to understand it as a divine gift of some sort, like the Malamu given by the gods. What is clear, regardless, is that, unlike Naram Sin, Moses does not boast or even take pride in his new divine-like status. He is instead characteristically humble. In fact, the text clearly states that Moses had no idea that his face looked like this. Indeed, once he becomes aware of how his visage frightens the Israelites, Moses takes steps to remediate it. He calls the people over to him and delivers God's message, after which he puts on a veil. So, Exodus 34:33, when Moses is finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. The veil somehow alleviates their fear, but Moses removes the veil whenever he speaks with Adonai. He puts it back on when he relays Adonai's message to the people in verses 34-35. Text is not clear as to why this practice is effective, but we see from earlier text in Exodus that to look on God and also, or so it would seem, God's God-like representative is dangerous. In Exodus, the use of the veil thus connects Moses' Quran face once again with the divine realm and qualities of divinity.
That reminds me of the way Kohanim will put their talit over their head.
So
to
I would say that element, and then as you probably know, in a traditional synagogue, people would turn away when so for those that are not familiar with this, there is a portion in a in probably a morning service,
yes,
when the Kohanim, people who trace their lineage back to Aaron,
right.
bless through the male line, bless the congregation.
Right.
And it's in the words from the book of Numbers, may God bless you and protect you, may God's countenance shine
Yeah.
upon you and be
Priestly
gracious with you, and
blessing
so on.
is given, yes.
So the traditional way this is done is the Kohanim are at the front of the congregation, they pull their talit over their face,
It's-
and then it's so powerful that the congregation turns away from them. And I think it's exactly the same idea, that to be in the presence of the Shekhinah, or God in some sense, is dangerous. And then, you probably have heard me and others say that the Kohanim hold their hands like this to form the letter Shin, from which Leonard Nimoy, who was modern Orthodox, Jim, on the scene, developed a Vulcan salute. I don't know why my hand keeps going up. This is really interesting. Okay. Okay. So, okay, we're getting.
Maybe
Thank you for
this
reading.
Zoom
ahead.
is more sophisticated than we think, and when you hold up your hand to do the Kohanim thing, it thinks that it detects that you're raising your hand.
Yeah,
and
yeah, it's pretty scary. Yep.
that would be a good feature to build into it, but I don't think it has it.
It's powerful.
Would that be artificial intelligence? No, that's last week. Okay, let's go to behaving like God.
And by the way, if someone else would want to read, I don't want to hog it all, if you will.
No, you can't use that term. Keep reading.
It's not
It's
kosher,
not kosher.
not
Yeah.
kosher.
Okay.
Please.
No, not kosher.
Yeah, if you
Behaving
don't
like
mind,
God.
Thank you.
Despite his fear-inducing appearance, Moses must deliver God's message to the people, which he does. Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him. And Moses spoke with them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he commanded them all that Adonai had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. The way Moses relates to the people and their response to him after he was Karaned is reminiscent of accounts earlier in Exodus, when God interacts with Moses and the Israelites in much the same way, with the same key terms.
So I'm not sure where the author is going in this discussion, but different verbs are used. When God calls to Moses, kara, the people return, shuv. God speaks to Moses, daber. The Israelites come near, nagash. The God commands the Israelites, siva. I'll let you continue, but I honestly don't know.
What is the?
The only thing I can think of is they're talking about verb repetition. And Moses is basically communicating God's instructions to the Israelites. Stephen.
Okay, two questions. The word that its translation as Quran, which is where there's no Q in Hebrew. In Hebrew without the vowels, is it spelled the same as the Muslim holy book?
Quran. No, actually that's the word Quran is actually related to this word, kara, calling or reciting.
Yeah.
So it's a very good question, but there's no nun, there's no n sound. But yeah, kara with an aleph means to call out. The person who reads Torah in Hebrew, in Jewish tradition, is called a Baal Koreh, the master of the calling out or reading. And yeah, the word for the Muslim holy book is related actually to this first one. It's a very good question.
Okay. Are there any known radium deposits in the Sinai Desert?
Any known radium?
If you're going to
Here's
go with
my-
the radiation from Moses' face thing, let's move on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There are
that was
none
my
known-
idea. Was
there are none known to
maybe
me,
God
Stephen.
was sprinkling radium on Moses' face, and he was wearing a veil to protect people from the radiation.
Yep. Let's continue.
That would explain the glowing.
So
Okay.
such echoes are likely intentional. Moses has taken on a divine quality after all. Not surprisingly, therefore, his face, like God's, is best left unseen. See above. Just as Moses serves as a mediator between Adonai and the people when they express their fear of hearing the divine voice in 2018 to 21, Moses again recognizes the need to protect Israel from the divine, this time by using the veil. Is Moses too godlike? That Moses' Quran face requires veiling signifies his elevated status. To quote Leon Cass, Moses, it would seem, has become a godlike figure, towering above the people, an object of awe and reverence. In fact, in one pseudo-epigraphic text, the 2nd century BCE drama called Exegode, Leading Out, by Ezekiel the Tragedian, Moses assumes the very throne of God, takes God's scepter, and wears God's crown. I, Moses, made approach and stood before the throne. He, God, handed over the scepter. Then he bade me mount the throne and give to me the crown. Then he himself withdrew off the throne. I gazed upon the whole world round about, things under it and high above the skies. Then at my feet a multitude of stars fell down, and I their number reckoned up. They passed
Wow.
by me like armed ranks of men.
And I think we're familiar with actually the concern of the rabbis that we see in the Haggadah, that Moses would be worshipped as a God incarnate. And we're talking, yes, we are talking about you know who. And so in a traditional Haggadah, Moses doesn't appear, which if you think about it, is almost astounding, because the purpose of the Haggadah is to tell the story of the Exodus, and they tell the story of the Exodus without even mentioning Moses.
Right. What God did. It's what
Yeah,
God
basically
did.
it's God, not a messenger, not an angel. And the scholars, I think there's consensus that this, of course, the Haggadah is put together definitely during Christian times, and the rabbis were concerned that that Moses be treated, you know, in a Christ-like fashion. Jerry.
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm wondering, is Aaron or even anyone else mentioned by name in the Haggadah traditionally? I can't recall that they are.
I don't recall. You know, I'm
A
so used to
lot
working.
a lot of rabbis are mentioned by name, but
But
when it's
yes.
like there's 4 guys who had a Seder that went
Yeah,
on
they
till
stay
this-
up all night and yeah, and
Okay, yeah, but I'm talking about, but the names that I should have been more
No,
clear.
I
But the
I
names
don't-
that are in the Exodus, specifically the book of Exodus, is anyone named at all? Even Miriam? No one. I don't think so. I don't think anyone is named. It's not just
No.
Moses. Aaron isn't mentioned, Miriam, etc.
Yes.
Pharaoh
yes,
is mentioned.
Well, Pharaoh's
yes,
mentioned,
yeah,
but
yes,
Pharaoh's
yes.
also a title. It's not a name per se.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's but and I also came across the idea, but this is definitely in Torah. You know, Moses is buried on Mount Nebo, wherever that is, and no one knows where it is. And I remember hearing a tradition that there was concern that if we identified where Moses's burial spot would be, people would come to worship Moses as sort of a demigod.
But there is a place in Sinai, which is the name of Nebo.
Yes, and it's a Muslim tradition, I think.
Well, there's a
Maybe
Mount
Christ-
Sinai in Sinai, but nobody knows if that's the Mount
Yes,
Sinai that's in
yes.
Sinai.
Yes.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Yes. Jerry.
There's also Mount Sinai and Simi Valley.
Yes.
The picture that we often see, in fact, it was another big Michelangelo of the Last Supper, I think it is.
Yeah.
Is that supposed to take place? Is he observing Passover there in that picture?
Yeah, that's a whole other question. So there are many traditions which assert that the Last Supper was a Passover Seder. I think the consensus of scholarly opinion is that it was not a Seder. And I don't know what Michelangelo was asserting, because I don't
Because
think
they wouldn't have all sat on one side. They would have sat around the table.
Well, Jesus would have observed it just like he read from the Torah.
no, but if you look in the Torah, there's not much detail, if any, about how you observe a Seder.
Well, the bread of
sacrifice.
affliction is mentioned.
No.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not certain about that. But in any event, I don't think in Michelangelo's depiction you have anything that looks like matzah. But I'm not going to go there. I really
And
really
I
don't
think
know.
you do have something that looks like leavened bread. That's because I remember
Yes.
somebody reading once the that the dinner rolls are arranged in a way that
It's an
coincides with the
artistic,
notes
it's an
of some
artistic
musical
interpretation.
composition.
Yeah, the issue about whether it was a Seder has to do with the timing of the trial and the execution, and it's just not consistent with it being a Seder without getting into
No.
details on that.
Or if Michelangelo even knew what a Seder was.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the whole business of what you do it as a Seder is in the Mishnah, which wasn't written down until the year 200. I'm going to take over the reading, give you a little rest.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Redirection toward God, the tabernacle. As Cass rightly notes, Moses will immediately use his elevated status to build a tabernacle, to redirect the people's awe and reverence to the Lord, not himself. A wise move in light of the people's history in Egypt under despotic pharaohs, whose powers were godlike. It's also a wise move given what takes place at Sinai, both with the Decalogue and the punishment for the golden calf, where Adonai makes it clear that he will brook no rivals. A further wisdom here is that the tabernacle can function as a place of divine human mediation, even when Moses is gone. And yet, given what transpires with and to Moses in Exodus 34, subsequent traditions that exalt Moses even to the highest are not entirely unrelated to this curious text that says that his face shone or was horned, like the very gods and like the very god kings. In point of fact, Moses' Quran face may lay at the root of those latter interpretive traditions. Coda. It is highly ironic and profoundly unfortunate that the remarkably positive notion that Moses' face was Quran was received later by some Christians in anti-Semitic ways. In this later context and reception, Moses' horns were seen as somehow demonic, if not downright devilish. But even the most cursory look at the ancient context, the material remains of antiquity, especially art, demonstrate that nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the truth is precisely to the contrary. Looking at ancient Near Eastern iconography helps us to see that the text afresh and in a new light, and we might add in this case also to see it aright. And that's this. And there's a lot of footnotes for those of you who really want to dig into it. So including an article I'm just strolling down to on the anti-Semitic origin of horned Moses. And Jim, if you're interested, I can find that reference in the New Testament to you are the sons
If
of
you
your
actually
father.
had horns on your head, you wouldn't need the Velcro. You could just make 2 holes.
That's right. It would make it much easier for me to wear my yarmulke. I use Velcro. I was discussing this with Stephen to keep my yarmulke on without having to fuss with those clips. And it is not true that I had the other part surgically implanted on my head, but I have told people that. And people believe me, which is another kind of scary thing. So I'm glad we got through the article. So for me, it is a delight to note that everything is much more complicated than I thought it was. I think Cheryl would agree that says more about me than the text. And I actually do believe that Torah study is Rorschach, that we learn more about people as we study Torah with them. Sandy. You're muted, Sandy. You need to unmute. There's an image you're showing us, which is kind of whited out. It's a little hard to see. So.
Yeah, it's the
it's
too bright.
just not. It's too bright to show up on the screen. But if you want to say something, you have to unmute yourself. Sandy, you are unmuted on Zoom. You are muted on Zoom.
I'm sorry. You can't see it.
No, it's hard to see what details you're
That's
looking.
too bad. It's Chagall's image of Moses.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's yeah. I wonder if I closed my lights.
No, you know what? If Cheryl zooms, Cheryl looks at Chagall's image of Moses, I can and finds that image, I can have her share screen.
It's called
Chagall. Rather than holding the phone up
in the Bible.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's a poster,
you could,
and it's
you can find it
wonderful.
online.
You could see
Sandra,
the
rather than holding the phone up to the camera, why don't you connect into the Zoom from the phone and then hit share screen?
Yeah, I mean, in effect, that's what I'm asking.
You're talking about somebody.
Yeah,
do those kinds of things.
Jerry
knows.
Well, I guess what all this reminded me of perhaps was why about 50 years ago, this woman from, where was she from? Near the city, where you did some rabbinic work in, oh God, what's that state? Montana, not Montana. Was it Montana? Billings?
It doesn't narrow things down very greatly, I have to
Billings,
say.
something
No,
50
it
years
was
ago.
Bozeman, Montana, probably.
She kept putting her hand on my head and, you know, brushing her hand like that. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she did say, "I just wanted to see your horns." And I couldn't believe that. I mean,
Yeah, so that's what we talked about before.
50 years ago,
Okay.
and
And
no one would do that today.
I
Um,
turned my screen around to the actual poster. Does that help at all?
Nope.
Well,
No.
that's a poster, is a copy, but I got to tell you something. I was
It's
at a
not a
friend's
copy,
house.
it's an original lithograph, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, no, but I was at a friend's house once
Yeah.
and I saw it in his hallway. I said, "Is that?" And he said, "That's the original. That's it. He owns it."
The
Yeah, the
oil,
actual Moses
so
Chagall,
the
yeah.
question I have, Sandy,
It's the
does it
oil?
depict horns
Yay,
on
the
Moses?
oil.
Yeah, it was amazing to see the actual one right in front of you, you know.
well,
Yeah, you can see the horns, yeah.
Okay.
it was
So-
made as a poster and
Yes.
in a limited edition as a lithographic
Okay.
poster.
So I do want to show you, for Jim's sake, and because it is
Yeah,
relevant, this is actually from a talk I give on anti-Semitism, which is, I think in a moment, that thing will.
Oh,
Christian
that was the one you're
anti-Semitism
referring to.
in the
Oh,
New
well.
Testament. So this is from the Gospel of John, where I think it's Jesus talking probably to the Pharisees, but I'm not sure. But he says, "You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires." And I'm not exactly sure where the connection between the devil and horned comes from.
Oh,
So you can check that. That's John 8:44.
okay.
Were there Jews that survived the Holocaust by convincing people that they must not be Jewish because they didn't have horns?
I've never heard that.
It would seem as though it should
Yeah,
have
I mean, I don't think it would have convinced the Nazis. Jim.
Doubt it.
I I don't take much for granted with you, Rabbi. Do you think that Moses was a real person?
So what I would say is, and I will say this very carefully,
You would
I
say.
believe that it's part of our sacred mythology, which may be true, but there is no evidence other than the Bible that Moses was a real person. And nor does my connection with Judaism and beliefs about Jewish beliefs require me to believe that. And I often state that just gonna click on the link.
That's so different of a thought from.
And I
the
often,
Orthodox.
yeah, and I often talk about the idea that the earliest biblical characters that have extra biblical reference, namely references to these characters that are not in the Bible, are David and Solomon. And there's some scholarly question about whether they existed, but I think the preponderance of belief is that there were kings of Israel named David and Solomon. But whether there was actually a Moses is not at all clear. And so I'm going to show.
Tell me it isn't so.
I'm going to show the Chagall that Sandy mentioned. So I mean, very stylized, but clearly
it's a little different than the one it's
okay.
the one, yeah. I'm sorry you can't see the other
but there's
one.
something, and it's not clear. Is it horns or is it rays of light? Actually, I gave a talk at a Catholic church, and this guy gave me copies, signed prints, which I donated to the Federation, and I hope they'll be able to sell it someday, of a Dali image of Moses. And I know they tried to auction it at an event, and the reason it didn't sell is it looked too much like horns. And
Dali?
you can look at Salvador Dali and for his image of Moses also. And I actually had two of these in my home.
I didn't realize that that Chagall did so many different Moseses.
Oh, actually,
I
not
thought-
surprising.
Yeah, he did a lot of them, as it turns out. So I guess it's not really that unique.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I mean, I always thought it was just Jerome mistranslating or taking a translation that would have a negative connotation, but it's clearly more complicated than that. And
True.
so I appreciate
Yeah.
being educated on that.
Proving
Thank
the
you,
point
Rabbi.
you made earlier to me privately about me having really pointless questions. If Moses had horns, would we be able to make shofar out of them?
No, you can only make horns out of the
Animal.
Ram.
horn of a kosher animal.
Yes.
And a human is not a kosher animal.
Right.
A human, not animal.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's actually one exception to that, and that is you cannot make a shofar out of a bull's horn, because we don't want to remind God about a certain incident of a golden calf. But any other kosher animal, you can make a shofar out of, an udu or something, which is the one that I have, and clearly a ram's horn. And
Yeah. Right.
okay, so that actually worked. Just about an hour, and I before we got on, I was looking at things to do next week, and the subject is going to be what makes wine kosher or not kosher, which
It's made by
actually
hand.
is I'm sorry,
Isn't it because it's made by?
it's more
Jewish people?
complicated than you think. Okay,
Because
There it
and
is.
I think
Oh, like
we had
The
this
gold
discussion,
standard Cheryl has there.
and it says mevushal on it, right, Cheryl?
That's right, Mevushal.
Mevushal. So come and find out.
Which will make Jerry very unhappy, because then it's
Oh.
not really wine.
You'd be better off eating the bottle than drinking that. You'd be
Well, not
healthier.
according to the website I found, but anyway, this is the website is from a
right here, it's
manufacturer of
stamped.
kosher. It's stamped what?
Mevushal. It has the
Mevushal,
stamp.
right? Okay, so tune in next week for the exciting question of what makes wine kosher and what makes wine not kosher. In fact,
And show and tell? You
yeah,
bring,
and
you bring
Cheryl,
samples?
please don't consume all of that by next week, or if you do, check your insulin supply. And yeah, I mean, either you're interested in everything, or I'm not sure why you're here. So I
If
just
it has to do with Moses, I'm interested, and this was a lot of fun, Rabbi.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
good.
Rabbi, how is Sonia's recovery going?
Sonia's recovery is proceeding normally. In fact, she drove herself to the to her horse today, so she's definitely doing better.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thanks.
Thank you for asking. Okay, so we'll see you next time. Take care. Let's see.
Thank
Today is
you.
Wednesday. Yeah. So Monday, we're talking about kosher wine, and Wednesday, I can't remember what I said I was going to talk about. But
Hopefully we didn't scare Sandra away.
No, not at
No.
all. I enjoyed it. I can't